If I'm expecting the external world to deliver me happiness, then when it doesn't live up to my expectations, then I experience agitation or suffering. So when the world changes around me, I cannot accommodate that change. To describe the mechanism of relating to these different changes, to relating to the external world. So we use two words, involved and objective. Involved arises when we have an uncontrolled mind. We are objective when we have the intellect governing the mind through insight. So let's give an example. You go to a horror film. You go to watch the 25th anniversary of The Omen, or you go to watch Freddy Krueger's Nightmare, or whatever your favourite horror film happens to be. And you go along and you sit there and you're afraid, you're terrified, you're exhilarated, but you enjoy it. You're experiencing those emotions of whatever you want to call it, fear and exhilaration, but it's enjoyable for you. Now, for some reason, you brought along your young niece or young nephew, all right, and she's 5 years old, completely irresponsible on your part, but never mind. She is watching the exact same film, and she is also experiencing the same emotions of fear and exhilaration, but she is suffering. What's the difference? Yeah? Yes, controlled, uncontrolled mind, yes, but less philosophically. What's the difference? If this was not a philosophical discussion, she thinks it's real, whereas you know it's just a movie. So this is your insight. You have sufficient insight to recognize that what's going on the screen is not real, and the emotions that I'm experiencing are just a roller coaster that I intended to get on at the very beginning. This is what we mean by insight. It's a piece of information that is a lot more than just information. It's something that has seeped into the personality to such an extent you know it to be real, and it totally changes the complexion of what you're experiencing. It's not just information, it's insight, it's intuition. The child lacks that intuition, she lacks that insight, whereas you know it. You know it so well you don't even need to say it to yourself. Which is why when I ask this question, what's the difference between the adult and the child, usually there's 2 or 3 minutes of head scratching and other sort of highly philosophical answers, because the most obvious answer is so obvious that we don't even think about it. But the reason that I don't mind watching a horror film is because I have the insight to recognize it's not real. That keeps me objective to the experiences that I'm having, the emotions that I'm having. What does he say in more Shakespeare? He says, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have the exits and the entrances. So that up on the screen there, that's a movie. But imagine being able to treat your entire life, everything that's happening, as if it were a movie. To have that degree of insight where you can enjoy everything that goes on, the whole drama of the human experience, but not be affected by it. This is living objectively. So just a brief rundown of the distinction between involved and objective. So as we said, governed versus ungoverned mind. So when we are involved, what it means is that we've got a loss of perspective. We're completely caught up in the experience that we're having. We're embedded in it, and we can't see anything outside it. To go back to the example of the film, when you're watching a film, you're not embedded in that experience. There's a part of you which is standing outside of what's going on in the film and outside of the emotions you're experiencing. That part is your insight. It's just a film. It's not out here in the real world. So this is being objective. When we're caught up, we lose a wider perspective on things, and that's why we are unprepared for change. If I'm caught up in a relationship, say, when that relationship makes a sudden shift, I'm not ready for it. And so whatever the relationship does, if it's a drop, I drop with it. If it's a rise, I rise with it. I don't have control over my own emotions, my own mental state, my own sense of well-being. It's being controlled from outside of me, as it were. Whereas when we are prepared for change, we're poised, we're objective, we're balanced. So the example that we've sometimes used, When you see this sign on the road, if you're traveling on the freeway, caution, road work ahead, expected delays. Why do they put it there? To prepare you, to manage our expectations. If I expect a free flow of traffic, 75 miles an hour down the freeway for the next 40 miles, when I come up against the roadwork, frustration, because I was not prepared for it. So this sign is preparing us for the inevitable slowdown. Once we are prepared, we are no longer affected by the change when we come across it. So what we need to do is to put big signs all through our life. Caution. Frustration ahead. Or caution, bad boss ahead. Expect frustration. Caution. Ungrateful children ahead. Expect frustration. Caution. Your physical body will get old and die. Expect delays. This is the idea. We are preparing ourselves for change by assessing the environment. So what this sign is doing the assessment for us and giving us the information about what we are about to meet. This is what we need to do with the entirety of our life. We need to prepare ourselves by making a correct assessment of the environment that we are meeting. So this can be done before or after an experience, preferably before, but it can be done in either way. Once we have a correct understanding of what the environment is, we don't expect it to be different, and so when it changes, we can accommodate that change much more easily.
So, taking the example of a football game or any game, and if you want to be objective and not take sides, as opposed to someone who's involved in the game and who's rooting as a fan for a particular game, who's getting more out of life? Those who are involved in the game or those who are objective?
So what you've said is that the objective person doesn't take sides. That person has wrongly understood what objectivity is. If you're objective, what it means is you will root for your side to win and root for the other side to lose. But the difference is, what happens if your side loses when you're objective? You won't become depressed. You won't be frustrated. You'll be like, oh, what a fantastic game that was. It was so close. Did you see right? And then they beat us at the last moment. Oh, the drama. I was on the edge of my seat for the whole time. If I'm involved, then when my team loses, I'm dejected, I'm frustrated. And then when I'm walking past some of the fans of the winning team, and then they say something back to me and I get into a fight with them. I go to the bar and try to drown my sorrows and get more angry. This is because I'm not objective. So being objective doesn't mean that you cut off certain aspects of life. In fact, being objective allows you to enjoy it even more. Because when your team does win, you celebrate the win. And when your team loses, in a sense, you celebrate the loss. Because you know it's just a game. And you're there for the spectacle. You're there for the clash. You're there for the show of sportsmanship and prowess and skill and everything else. So when your team loses, you get all of that enjoyment and none of the affectation of your team losing. So when you are properly objective, you get a lot more enjoyment out of life. When you're involved, even when your team is winning, what's it like? You can't really enjoy their win until the final whistle has been blown. So for 90 minutes, you're anxious because you never know, they might snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Only when that final whistle has been blown, now you get some relief. So when you're objective, you can enjoy the whole thing all the way through. So being objective doesn't mean avoiding certain types of human experience. Being objective means that you can now engage with all of them and enjoy all of them without having to shun certain ones and try to cling on to others. This is our objectivity. So then what we need to do is to develop some short-term objectivity by assessing the environment that we meet. That's what this next section starts to talk about. Any other questions before we move on to the next? All right.